Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew, and tonight my guest is Tony Rodriguez. He has a fascinating story. He claims to be a 20 and back slave in the secret space program. Now, Tony, for those of us who are not quite familiar, I know the 20 and back program, it's different for everyone. So kind of give us a brief overview about what yours was about and what yours was like.
It's always a lot. It's always a lot to say. It's hard to squeeze 20 years into a few sentences, but
well, basically, was yours a transfer of consciousness that kind of brought you back from the same age you left?
right. So what happened was I had the standard, what felt like the standard gray in your face alien abduction, and then was taken and lived for 20 years and traded from organization to organization, compartmentalized throughout the 20 years, and always as a slave, in a slave capacity. I was a slave, I was a worker, and I didn't really get compensated for it. And so anyhow, in that capacity for 20 years, and then at some point they put me through a process and put me back. And I went back into the 10-year-old body I was taken, and I woke up the next day after the abduction, the day of the abduction, and had no memory of it. I was different. I was changed, but I didn't have the immediate memories. I knew something happened, but I couldn't remember what. And I lived my life, and I went back to my life, and it felt like I hadn't been there for 20 years too. The next day was very awkward. Like I got lost in places that were normal. Like I was awkward. So, I mean, that's what happened. I wasn't somebody that was chosen because of my aptitude for the program. I was somebody that was chosen to fill a position. Some people are chosen, and even, it's hard to throw around the word, but even some people are actually bred for it, genetically modified and ready for it. So I wasn't one of those people.
So take us back to the beginning. How did it all start for you? I know it started in your childhood with I guess it was a classmate, was it?
There was a classmate of mine in the 4th grade. This would have been 82 to 83 school year for me in southern Michigan. And he identified himself as, he said his dad was an Illuminati. What's your dad do? And we were in the Talented and Gifted program, a TAG program in the school, which was like the top 5% of the kids, for test scores. And we met once a week, and he was there, and we didn't get along. And we kind of went back and forth, picked on each other, and he didn't like me. And so his dad, who he said was an Illuminati, came in and was the judge for the science fair that year. And he pointed me out to him, and I heard them talking about me. And it was that night or a night or two after that the abduction happened.
Did you hear what they were saying about you?
They said some things that didn't make any sense. He said we'll use him and send him to something, and then I heard the boy say, "Well, he doesn't deserve that." And he said, "Well, you're just gonna have to learn to manage your resources." It was something like that they had spoken, but I didn't pay any attention to it. To me, it was a moot point to me at the time. I was a 10-year-old kid, and so I just went on about my way. But it was, like I said, it was soon. It was like that night. I want to say that night, but I'm not entirely sure. It might have been, but it was within that night or a few nights that I woke up with a gray in my face, in the middle of the night.
Now, what else do you remember about that experience?
It went on for a while. We had an old farmhouse, 100-year-old farmhouse. We had 13 acres of property. We were far away from, our neighbors, and so in the middle of the night, the phone, we had the old style phone with the long cord, and it started ringing, and there were lights outside the window. Like outside it was lighting up, which was unusual, way brighter than like a car pulling in. But nobody got up to answer it. I told myself somebody to answer the phone, and nobody did. And then it would quit ringing, and then you could hear there was like a static electricity kind of feel, and then the phone would ring again, and it was weird. It was like the house was being buzzed, by something. And then it quit, and there was an orb that came into my room, like a ball of light that came in my room and whizzed around, and then I heard it go down into the hallway and down the stairs and then back up into my room. And I remember I laughed. It made me giggle. And then it disappeared, and then I fell asleep. And I woke up with a gray in my face, like right standing over me, looking at me. And it was dark, and I had bad vision, so I reached up and touched its face, and I thought it was my dad pulling a joke, because he was that kind of person, and I said, "Dad, take off the mask." And when I touched it, it was very porous, more than skin, and it was cold and wet. And I went, and I was shocked, and I went to scream, and it paralyzed me. And I could move my eyes around, I could see, but I wasn't able to move or make any noise. And I saw, I want to say 3 other figures come in at the foot of my bed, 3 or 4, and they were short reptiles, and they had hoods on and like a suit, but they were a reptile, and they were like 4 feet tall. And they picked me up and carried me to the end of my bed, and there was a flash of light, and I lost consciousness at that point, and I woke up on a table in like an examination room with a few of those grays and one that was taller and white and had the same kind of shaped body, but it was white and had a long neck. And they were doing tests on me.
Wow. And how long did that go on before you were actually, I guess, transported to start your 20 and back?
They said that, so they were communicating with me telepathically, and there was a reptile in the room, and one of those short reptiles, and he was communicating with me, and the other ones, the grays were not, they didn't communicate. They did communicate a little, but they were very, I guess, worried about their tasks. They didn't have any kind of communication for me whatsoever. It was robotic. Right. And they were doing a test to see if I had the genetics necessary for what they wanted to do, was what they said. We're testing to see if you have the genetics. And then it took like a good while, 20 minutes to a half hour before they got the results. So I just sat there. And I was ecstatic. I thought I was in a first contact. I thought that aliens were landing, and this was the beginning of the whole world knowing about ETs. And so I was thrilled. I thought it was I thought they had just got here. And the next day at school, I was going to be able to tell everybody that, I met them too. I thought it was that kind of thing. And when the results came back, they said I had just barely enough genetics for them to do what they wanted. And the gray reminded the reptilian to get permission. And his exact words were, "We want to borrow your consciousness. And you're going to be gone. You're going to live for 20 years longer." And I said, "No, I can't do that. I got to go back to my mom and dad. I have a family." And he said, "Don't worry. You're going to go back tomorrow, but you're going to live 20 years. He explained it to me. And he said, "We're just going to borrow your consciousness." He said, "You're lucky." He made it sound like I won the lotto, like he sold it to me.
Right.
He said, "We need your help. You're going to help us. And you'll be back tomorrow. Your parents, no one's ain't going to even know you were gone. And you're going to be able to see them tomorrow, but you'll be 20 years smarter," or, something like that. And so I agreed. And they put me on the bed. They put a sheet over me, and the table sucked it tight to the bed. And they cut the sheet open. They, cut my eye so they could see my eye, and they cut so I could breathe. And a big needle came and went right in my tear duct. Boom. And how people get punched and they see stars? It was like that. I saw stars, and it felt like I got sucked out of my body.
Wow.
And the next thing I remember is waking up with a human in the desert. It turned out later to be Inyokern Air Base, one of the buildings there, and there was a doctor and a nurse giving me an examination, and I had no memory of my family or where I came from. I had no memories of being at the abduction and nothing. I had complete amnesia when I woke up there. And I went through a trauma-based mind control program and a remote viewing program.
And you were a full-grown adult at this time?
No, I was still exactly the 10-year-old kid.
Oh, wow.
Like I started out at that,
Yeah, right. I understand. Okay, so now, before we get into your actual experiences, what age did you start to remember all this, and how did that happen?
That's a great question. I guess all through it, like when I came back, I had not visual memories, but like emotional memories. right the day of, but I had no idea what it was for. And then I would have strong reoccurring dreams that were memories, and then I would have waking memory where I would remember certain things. I remember when I was a teenager, when I was like 14 or 15, remembering standing on a spaceship and working and looking out the window of a spaceship. And I remember sitting on a couch one day and just remembering that and going, when the hell could that have happened? You know, like that's what I told myself. When could that? What? And so I just must have been a dream I had. It must have been a dream. And so I brushed it off. And what happened was, I don't know if it was an MRI or whatever, but it was May of 2015. At the end of it, I had an MRI on my head. I had headaches for a while, and I went to the doctor, and they gave me an MRI scan. And I've heard that others, the Mars Records guys, got their memories back after an MRI. But I didn't think about it at the time. I got my memories back, and then a year later, I looked back at my medical records when I heard about the Mars Records, and I went, whoa, it was 2 weeks before my memory. But so it was like April, like the first week of April. And I stumbled across the Randy Kramer info and his videos where he explained the quantum time dilation of how they do, you know, they take you for 20 years in increments, and then they put you back, and you go right back to your room a few minutes later. And I went, and when I saw that, I thought, all that time all those things that I remembered that I dismissed because I thought, when did I have time? I thought, oh my God, it happened, you know. And once I accepted that, they all came. It was like huge chunks of years worth of memories. Once I accepted one or two memories that were keystone memories, and I said, wow, that did happen. And once that happened, big chunks of memories came, and I spent the next 6 weeks probably kind of digesting it. And I didn't want to believe it at first. The things I remembered were, you know, some of them were terrible. Like I was used in sex slave service as well, which is not something to be proud of. Right. And what happened was I went on Google. I remembered the places I had been on Earth. So a lot of people can take a 20 and back, or whatever you want to call it these days. I hear they're patenting it. But a lot of people do it 20 years, and they're whisked straight off the Earth. And so the entire time they're not on the Earth, and then they come back. I was on the Earth for the first 6 to 8 years. I want to say it's vague how, you know, the dates, but for the first at least 6 years, I spent time on Earth. I was in Peru and I was in Seattle. And in my regular life, I'd never gone to Seattle, and I have witnesses that'll attest to that. But I knew my way around Seattle. And when the memories came back to me, I looked on Google Earth and I found the house I lived in, and it was freaking. And you know, because I was internalizing it myself, like you're talking about, right after I got the memories back, and I didn't want to believe it, you know. And so when I found the house in Seattle, I was shocked. I went, whoa, that's exactly how I remember it. And not only that, but it was listed for sale. So there were pictures of the inside of the house and the backyard, which I remember spending summers swimming in the pool. And you know, the downstairs, it was exactly how I remember it. And I could tell it was remodeled since I lived there. So, and the same staircase, I used to sneak up and steal candies in the middle of the night. I went, what? You know, so it was a real defining moment in the whole thing. And then I also found the town in Peru. That was exactly how I remember it. Now, I haven't been there, but I did visit the town in Seattle. I did go physically after in 2016. You know, following year, I went to the house in Seattle. I didn't get to go inside; it's gated. But the town and the stores in town and everything are exactly. I knew my way around. At one point when I got close to the house, I didn't need to use the maps anymore. So I knew my way around. I went to a park there that I had visited during the 20 and back, and I knew where the beach was. I knew that they're right up around the corner. There were bigger rocks because we used to throw them at each other. I mean, I knew that stuff. And it was freaky because, you know, remembering it all, you're your own skeptic. You don't want to believe this, you know. You don't want to believe it. But I had to at that point. And so I reached out to a few researchers during that first year, and I just wanted counseling. I wanted to talk to other people that had gone through it, and there was nothing, you know. And so researchers grilled me about details. and I did an interview. I was asked to do an interview, and so I did, and here I am.
That was with Dr. Sala, correct?
Was the first interview I did. Yeah, him, and then I did Rob Potter. I did one with Rob Potter right in the same time, the first two interviews. But like I said, I just wanted therapy. I just wanted to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And there wasn't anybody yet, So what's interesting is that since that's happened, I've had hundreds of people reach out to me with similar memories, similar experiences. And most of them have a dark twist of they don't want to talk about it. Most of them don't remember things that they don't want to talk about. So that's how widespread it is. And the people that are running these programs have frankly abused it, have had the ability to memory wipe people, and it's been abused. Some of the programs have been used, I guess, honorably, but many of them haven't. And many ETs out there don't see us as equals. They see people on Earth as inferior, and they can take them and do what they want and put us back, and you're not going to remember it anyway. And there were times when I went through surgery. There were times when I was kept, I slept on the floor. And when I complained about it, said, this is, you can't do this, because I knew about human rights, the whole time, even from my time on Earth. And the answer was always I got it from ETs, and I got it from humans. The answer was always, you're not going to remember it anyway. So don't worry about it. You don't have any rights. You're not going to remember it. We can do anything to you. You're not even going to remember it. Don't worry about it. Just quit complaining. That's what happened.
Wow. So if you could tell us a little bit about your experiences before you went off planet on Earth. You said you were in some MK Ultra programs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. What's great is that the CIA declassified library online turned up some of the funding and paperwork for the program that I went through. Not the explicit program. They didn't say, right here at Inyokern we were doing that, but the guy involved has a gap in his career. I found him, and his career has a gap in it in 83. And there are letters between him and people in the CIA about funding in 82. And so I found corroborating evidence for it. But basically, it was a remote viewing program that was using what they believed were clones supplied by the military, and they put them through an MK Ultra trauma-based mind control so that they would obey, and then they put them through other advanced remote viewing teachings, practices, and in order to make, I guess, on-demand psychics. And what it culminated in was they put us in and they put us in oxygen tents and denied us air. And then they had us strapped into EKGs, and when we were close to death, a bell would ring, and then the air would come back in the tent and you'd wake back up, and they repeated it, and you just stayed in there. So there was a constant state of getting close to death and then coming back. And without naming names, I've also found information that was a technique that they used.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. But I've also found documents and comments made by people in the same institute that publicly that said they've had great results with near death in children for psychic phenomena, ESP. So what they were doing was lowering oxygen, and then after a while, I remember there was a certain point where I was getting familiar with death. Like the beginning of death was happening, and I could feel like I was leaving my body. And I remember there was a certain point when I got mad about it, and the lights flickered, and I spoke like an adult, and I said, "Hey, you let this kid die," something like that, and that let me pass. And so what they did was they gave us a drug. Long story short, after that was completed, we passed, and they would give us a drug, and we would be knocked out, but we were able to speak. Like they could channel and talk to other dead people while we were close to death. And they shipped me I went to the house in Seattle, who was a billionaire, and he was a practicing Satanist, and I witnessed a ritual human sacrifice, and they were a full-on Satanist, and he owned me. He was the first owner, and they would put us under, and he was using us for business advice, myself and 2 other kids that had been through the program. But then we were shipped off. He had a private plane, and I was taken to Puerto Tawantinsuyo, Peru, like a river town in the jungle in the interior of Peru. And there there was one guy that was my handler. He spoke English, and he was given a briefcase, and it had IV bags with doses of that drug, whatever it was. And once a month they had a cargo plane, a C-46 Commando cargo plane, and they would load it up with cocaine and fly it from Puerto Tawantinsuyo, Peru to Santa Marta, Colombia, and drop it off at the airport. And I was a psychic, like a radar unit, and we would take off and fly for about an hour, and then he'd put an IV in my arm. I'd lay on a cot in the plane, and he'd put me under, and I was a security measure. If there was bad weather or something bad was going to happen to the plane, or there were police somewhere, psychically I would warn them. I mean, I was unconscious for it all. I don't remember what I said, but when I woke up, he was always like shocked. He was amazed. And for the end, he had questionnaires from people inside the village. Like he was using me for psychic readings for the people that lived in the town while I was out during that time.
Now, do you still have any of these abilities?
I like to, I don't know. It's one of those things that, for me, I'm normal. So I always had precognitive dreams, like really like every day, precognitive dreams. And I just thought everybody did. But apparently not everybody does. So I had that. There's a few other weird things that I do, but I try to just be a normal guy. I haven't really delved into a lot of it. I've been researching it now that I've dug up a lot of the info on the CIA website, and it's led me. And now that I found the project name, which was Project Grill Flame, we were an offshoot of that. But I've been researching other projects around that time, the early '80s, and there's a lot. They worked with the Monroe Institute, the HemiSync. They used that on us, and they had people from the Monroe Institute that came and helped, and I'm sure that's off the record, but somebody has records of it. But I'm sure they wouldn't admit to it. But they did come, and I do remember the HemiSync stuff, and I found recordings, and I remembered exactly the box that you imagine that you put your stuff. You imagine your safety box inside the meditation, and I remember going through that during that program. So, to answer your question, yeah, a little bit.
Very interesting. Now, how did your experience on Earth end and your off-planet experience begin?
What happened was, when I hit puberty, I started getting really sick when they put me under in Peru, and I lost the ability. It started becoming incoherent when I spoke. And so I went back to Seattle to their house, and when I got there, it was different. It had been remodeled. There were bedrooms installed downstairs, and there were usually about 6 other boys living there. And it was like living in a orphanage. But we were sex slaves. We were sex slaves for political parties that they had all over in the area. And they would have them there on the property as well. And I was there for about 2 summers of it and going through sex abuse. And they had it down to a science, But the threat was that if you don't make it here, which is cushy, because it wasn't like an everyday, it wasn't like you would imagine like what a woman goes through. Like it wasn't like a brothel or something. It was rare. It was, a couple times a year we went to a party and were used, But the rest of the time it was just like living in an orphanage, very cold, and everybody treated you bad. But it wasn't like a high speed thing like some like the girls are taken into. It was specific. So, but the threat was if you misbehave here, which is easy and cushy, you're going to go to the military, and you'll be sold to the military, and you'll probably die in combat because you're a slave. And we did calisthenics every morning, and they gave us pills every day that we took. And one day they changed the pill, the formula, or whatever pills we were taking, and I was allergic to them. And after the third day, I was just violently sick from it, throwing up. And she called and made a call to whoever was in charge of us, and they said, well, he's just going to have to go to the military. We're not changing the formula for what they got to take. And maybe 2 weeks later, it was like a lame duck thing. I didn't have to do calisthenics no more. I just sat around the house, and it was a lame duck. They left me alone. And then about 2 weeks later, she took me to behind like a shopping center to a parking lot. And there were two guys in a van, and they put me in the back of the van and gave me a shot in my arm. I went to sleep, and I woke up back on the moon base that I remember that I was taken to in the first place. And I went through different form of training.
Were you a clone during this?
You know, I think so. To be honest with you, I think that consciousness transference is something that they can do. Also, according to Randy Kramer and other whistleblowers, that's part of the tech. That as long as you have brain activity, electricity in any kind of brain cell, that they can pull you back. They can clone you a body and put you back into it. And so that soldiers get blown up and shot dead all the time. But as long as there's brain activity, they can pull your consciousness back. And spark of life is what they needed. So I think that's exactly what happened. And it also explains a lot of people were modified. There are other whistleblowers that say that they had tattoos, and that when they were put back, there was no tattoo, no nothing. They go right back to their original body. So I think that there's consciousness transference. I think that, I was a kid, and they cloned me to the same kid, and then put me in it, and this body became a vegetable. And then I went off and lived. And then when that was over, they whatever, time travel's totally doable. You have guys like Andy with Project Pegasus, and a lot of the spaceships were, if you could travel out of the solar system, instantly jump, then they could also travel time. Like they could jump out and they'd jump back just a few minutes after they left, so that they still had the whole day. We'd jump out and be gone for 8 hours and then jump back. So time travel is a reality as well, and it's widely accepted. So that body could live 20 years. They put it back in time and just kill it. There's no, and then your consciousness, they still have your original brain cells. Only a few minutes have passed, and the other thing is, when I woke up, I didn't have memory of mom and dad in the new body. I didn't have memory of my school, mom, dad, sister, none of that. I lived 20 years, but then when they put me back, I had all those memories back, and I had no memories of the 20 years. You get what I'm saying? So if I would have left the local hard drive and gone back into that body, then the cloning aspect makes sense. That's how they did it. So I mean, it's kind of like getting surgery, and then they tell you what happened after. You don't know what happened when that's what I think happened, but do I know for sure? No, I don't know. I was being operated on while it was happening. So
how did you get to the moon?
The time I was unconscious, I don't really remember. I woke up on it, but the time I woke up vaguely sick on a craft. Damn! I just now remember that I woke up feeling sick.
Wow.
Huh.
Anyhow,
I was on a craft. It was the same kind of craft, and it was one of the triangles, like what people describe as a TR3. I don't know if for a fact if it was a the TR3B. I don't know.
Right.
But it was exactly how people describe it. It looked like an airplane. Imagine being on an airplane and having 20 seats wide, 20, 30 seats rows. It was really wide. And it had, there were poles that you could grab that every like 5 rows, there was a pole with something like you could grab. But it was just like an airplane.
And how long did you spend on the moon?
Well, the second time when I went there, maybe a month. And what that consisted of is I had a room with nothing on it but a blanket, and Gray would come and get me in the morning and take me to a school and plug me into a machine. I had a chin rest, you put your chin here. He gave me eye drops that were like a hallucinogen, like a drug, eye drops. and it had speakers, and it would start out with binaural stuff, woo, 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 for 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and then I had a screen that would flash movies, and then it would test me on the movies, and all I had to do was, the answers would pop up on the screen, and I would just have to look at the one I chose for a second, and then it would blink, and I'd look at it again, and this is your answer, and that was the learning process, and that was like 8 hours a day of that. That was later. The first time it was after the parking lot, after Seattle, and I got sold off to the military. I went to the moon, and that time it was the same kind of stuff like drugs, but they were movies about fight or flight. They were movies about with subliminal stuff in there, and it was always like it's honorable to die for your brother, to save a loved one. It's honorable. You love your command. You love the people in your unit. And it was like hellish, like programming, and it was 100% fight or flight. Never fly, always fight. Even give your life give your life for the fight. It was like heavy programming in that, and that was the core. Like I never got a gun to fire. I never learned how to do grenades or none of that. That was the military training, and then from there it was on to a bigger ship. Same thing. Same kind of craft, and then on to Mars. And it was there fast, but we had to wait for clearance. We were in orbit. We had to wait a couple hours to get clearance to land. And then I was taken on as soon as I got off that ship, I went down a hallway to a smaller ship and flown to a small base out in the boonies on Mars. And I was there for 6 weeks, a month, 6 weeks or something. And we did combat missions there. And that program got canceled. And then I ended up going to Ceres Colony.
Now, before we get to that, I wanted to ask you, on the moon, was this the first time you encountered an extraterrestrial?
No. Right after the MK Ultra stuff, or when I was 10, right after the oxygen tent,
right,
and I passed that, there was a trip to the moon. And so the whole time in Peru and Seattle, I had always told people, like, I'd been to the moon, and nobody believed me. I was a crazy kid, like I had been mind fractured and kind of was off, mentally I was off at that point. But I always told people, well, we've been to the moon. There's a base on the moon. And in Peru, I told them that, and it looked like the Pentagon, but in a different shape, in a triangle shape. I remember telling them that when I was in Peru, and so they called me the crazy boy from the moon. They called in Peru, in Puerto Tawantinsuyo. I'm sure somebody there right now alive still remembers it. I was, Los Loco Pequeño de la Luna was what they called me. Loco Pequeño de la Luna. Wow. That's what everybody, hey, and the day I left, they all lined up and waved goodbye, and they were saying, adios, Los Loco Pequeño de la Luna, the crazy boy from the moon.
Interesting.
That's what they called me in that town. So, but anyhow, that was so they took me there to the moon, and then I went through a few processes. There was a big needle that came right here, and it was hollow. It was the same kind of like gold colored, and then it did nothing. It was beep, it did nothing. And then I got a few other, like a blood test and a health exam from Grays, and then flown back. I was there for only a few hours, maybe a day, and then taken back to Inyokern. So at that point,
a mix of humans on the moon on these bases as well, correct?
There were humans there. They were in military uniforms. Right. They had a uniform.
Yeah. Now, take us through your experience on Mars a little bit. You said you were in battles there. Was this your first experience with any type of battles on Mars?
Absolutely. Well, they weren't. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like a battle situation. They were trying to make a quicker soldier, like a support soldier. It wasn't any kind of super soldier program. They were trying to generate great numbers of troops with less training. So we were as least trained, as least equipped. We had a smaller gun, and we had just environmental suits, and they were white. We were in bright white suits like a golf ball out there. And the soldiers had camouflage and big armor and with giant guns. It was like a bounding maneuver where the soldiers would walk parallel to us, and we would go one way. 6 of us would go one way, and I personally did 3 missions like that. The first mission went out and back, nothing happened, and the second mission we went out and back, and something happened that I was unaware of, and everybody was happy. They were high-fiving and stuff when we got back. The soldiers were happy. So there was something. And the third mission, we were engaged by insectoids. And I guess on Mars there are indigenous giant insectoids. I'll send you a picture. I had an artist draw one up. Also on the moon there was a test. They did a test run with a big insectoid. So that was technically I saw one first on the moon.
And these are the ones that are really tall. They're kind of a mix of a praying mantis and ant-looking being, and they have the 6 legs that they can walk on.
They're not super tall. He wasn't super tall, but they were in charge. So in the encounter, we got separated from the soldiers. The weather got bad, the third mission, and we were engaged. And the bugs, the one bit my arm. I lost an arm. I had an arm bit off, and a foot. And the other 2 guys, there were 6 of us. 3 of us got separated, and 3 of us, we started running and trying to get away. You could hear them coming, and the other 2 guys got engaged.
That must have been extremely traumatizing to experience having limbs bitten off by this creature.
And it stood on me. It stood on top of me, and the mantis, which my drawing is very close, but it's not exactly the face was different than the drawing, but doesn't matter. He had antennas, and when he got close, they went, and I went into like a dream state. I was begging for my life, please don't kill me. The other one the bigger one was like a spider kind, not a spider, but like that. And it picked me up and held me to it, and I was begging for my life, please don't kill me. I wasn't some tough guy at that point, and I was in shock from getting my arm bit off. But anyhow, when he came up and he did that, I totally went into a dream state with it, and it was looking through my life. I would be standing in the dream. I would be standing in places that I had been through up until that time, and I guess that was probably 7 or 8 years into my 20 and back. So into my 20 years, it was about like my 8th year in, and I would be standing in the room, in Inyokern, with it empty, nobody in it, and in the dream, the mantid would be there with me, and it was telling somebody about what it saw. And then it would go to the house in Seattle, and he would tell somebody about what he saw. And at the very end of it, he showed me my house that I grew up in, which I'd had no memory of, the farmhouse that I was taken from. It showed me the living room there, and he said, this is who you are. And I was like, please don't kill me. Are you going to kill me? And he said, we'll see. He was very professional, and it was a insect, but it was a very competent, very, very smart being.
Yeah, right.
And he was very competent, very professional, and I had a lot of respect for him for the way he treated me. He treated me better than the humans did at that time. But he showed me that room, and then he said, this is who you are. And then I woke up, and I was back to being back in the state of shock and everything. And they let me go, and they took off. And 2 soldiers found me and carried me back to the base, which was a great ways, a couple kilometers at least. And I remember they were fighting to keep me awake. I lost blood, and he kept slapping me. They were punching me hard and to keep me awake. And as soon as I saw the doors to enter the base, it was kind of like a tunnel with the doors in them. And as soon as I saw the doors, he let me go to sleep, and I passed out. And I woke up the next morning with my arm back and my foot back that had been severed. So people always ask me, how did that happen? You didn't see the surgery or anything? There was machinery there. There's a big machine around me, but I had no idea. That was on one of the early. So when you went in the base, the upper levels, I think the second level was the hospital, and then you went down to like the 5th level or something down, and that's where we lived. That was the cafeteria and where we were staying. And so I never really saw, that was the only time that I really saw the hospital area there. And I was not awake for the procedure to see, however my arm got back. I have no idea.
When I interviewed Randy Kramer, he spoke of these medical beds that had the capability to basically regenerate anything and even possibly bring you back to life. Or
Yeah.
have you experienced anything like that?
There was huge machinery there. I was on a medical bed. It was, I had the back up, and I was sitting there, and I got debriefed. There were two guys there. Like when I finally woke up, there were two guys there, and they asked me questions. What did that man say to you? And what happened? What did you see? And, basically they knew. I guess they had surveillance. Like they saw what happened, and they knew what was going on. So they didn't ask me too much about the mechanics of what happened. They knew. But they wanted to know what the mantid said, and I guess that was rare that the mantid was even out. Like most of the time, they didn't see them, so they were very curious about that. So I told them what I knew, and that was that, And then so that program had been canceled. Apparently, they said the bugs had adapted much faster than they were supposed to the tactic,
Right.
and so they canceled the program or changed it, But basically, my role in it had been canceled, and then we were in a lame duck thing for like a month after that, where we just sat there. We had literally nothing to do. We got up, we had breakfast, we went back to our room and sat there, and that went on for weeks. And then I was taken to a city, an underground city on Mars, flown in a smaller craft, came and got us, and it looked more like a resort, and there were civilians there, and it was populated. But I was taken into an area of that, and that was more of the same. But I had a room with a bed. I had a way more comfortable room. I had my own bathroom, and I had a comfortable bed. And it was like an apartment. It was nice, and maybe 200 or 300 square feet worth of size. It was a big place for me. So for me, it was luxurious. And it was the same thing. They would come and get me. A gray would come and get me in the morning and lead me to a school right down the hallway, not far. And so I didn't see anybody else. And I would go into school, and this one had a better, like a headrest, and it was the eye drops, and it was the same thing. It was testing, and it was ship repair. And I remember, what to do with a fire. If there's a fire, the procedure, if there was a fire on the ship, or, it went through safety protocols, and it was like basically how to operate tools. And that's what they showed me. And that went on. I was there for a long time doing that. And then one day they came and got me. A human came and got me, and he led me to a train station and put me on a train. And the train, when it took off, it went through a tunnel, and there was a poof, like a flash of light, like a bright poof. And like you felt dizzy, like ears ringing, and you felt dizzy for a minute. And then the train immediately stopped. So it was only a few minutes from the time it left its station and when I got out, I was on Ceres. I was on a whole nother planet, and they were Germans. And there was an assembly of German it was like German military stuff in a big hangar right off the train. And I was shocked. They gave us water. You had to have water after that. Everybody I guess your electrolytes got messed up from it, so everybody had to drink water immediately after. And so I just had a swallow of water, and then they rushed us over, and we did like a Pledge of Allegiance in German. They gave us German cards to read off of, and I began the rest of my stay. I finished my 20 years there, and I worked on ships. I was on a ship repair, like a slave, like myself and a few others like me, had a screen that told us what to do on how to fix stuff. It wasn't like I learned a great deal of technical knowledge. Basically, I learned how to operate tools, and I learned how to follow directions, and that's all I had to do. And I did that for years. It was like Groundhog Day.
Now, were you underground the whole time on Mars and on Sirius?
Yes. When I was on Mars, when I was flown from one base to the other, we flew, in the atmosphere. But on Ceres, everything's connected. Everything's underground, and it's all connected by trains. There are several trains that go to the same place.
I assume when you were battling, you were on the surface. Was the atmosphere breathable on Mars? What was that like?
Yes. And here's another thing. I think that the clone body that I had then had been modified to breathe the air. I think they had given me treatments that made me be able to breathe it better. But I could breathe the air just fine. And my suit I had an open face, but it had like a plastic cone around it and a helmet, and it had oxygen. So it not constantly. The suit monitored when I would use oxygen and give me more. Like you could hear it, when it turned on. If I started running, it would give oxygen. But So that way, a little bit of it lasted a super long time, but you could breathe the air, and it was cold and felt like you were at high altitude and really cold air.
What about, have you seen the surface of Sirius? What was that like?
I flew over it and looked out the window, but it's open to vacuum. There's no atmosphere or anything, and there's nothing on this. There were some there were structures that look like an antenna. You know, like at the end of an airport, how there's a few antennas that are there.
Right.
There were a few of them on the surface of Ceres, and that was it. There was nothing. You know, we flew over it a few times where I looked out the window and saw it, and then there was one time when I was allowed to come onto the bridge of the ship and watch us go in, and they docked inside what was, I guess. So I read up on it with NASA. They call them cold traps. There are places that never have the sun shine, holes that never have the sun shine in. And the entrance to the base had giant doors that opened up the hangar, and they were in a cold trap. And I guess that the one that it did get the sun, but only like a short time, once a year or something. Very, very, very seldom did sunlight ever hit the doors. And they did that on purpose. Everything was to be hidden. And not so much from Earth people, but from other ET races. You know, they didn't want to advertise that they had a giant colony there with 250,000 people living inside of it.
And you said it was mainly run by Germans?
It was run by Germans, yep. And they reported to an ET race that had a base around Jupiter, reptilians.
Okay, so have you come into contact with those reptilians?
What do you mean?
Have you ever met one? Have you ever seen one of the reptilians that the Germans answer to?
At the end, yes. Just there was on one occasion, there was a mission that went bad on the ship, and we were called there to answer for it. And I saw one of the, I don't know the word to say it, but he was a tall, skinny reptile. He wasn't one of the main ones in charge. I didn't see the ones in charge that time. I had to wait outside, and the captain and the officers of the ship went inside to meet with him. And the captain came out in tears and crying and like totally shook from it. And they were carrying him out, and then we went back to the ship. That was as close as I got to them. I stood in line next to one, you know, on Ceres. It wasn't uncommon to see ETs in public, but I didn't get out very much for that. And I was under strict orders to not communicate or interact with any kind of ET. You know. Right.
So you did come into contact with quite a few different species. And would you say the Greys are more of like a clone or sort of like a robotic entity?
Well, on Ceres, I don't recall seeing that many, if any. I don't remember.
What kind of ETs did you see on Sirius?
On Sirius, there were the Germans, and there were two other races that lived there. And one was a very tall race, like 9 feet tall, that had big heads and really like beady eyes, and human had hair, and they had really wide hips and like a weird build. And they had an electric device with them that lowered the gravity wherever they went. They were a low gravity race. And there was another race that had I've got an artist sketch I'll send you. And they always had long, straight hair. They had different color, blonde, black, whatever. But it was always long and straight hair. And they had big, pushed back foreheads, bigger eyes than we do. And they were tall. And they had different dimensions, like the dimensions of their arms were different. They had a weird walk to them. But those guys always worked on like maintenance stuff. They did maintenance in the hangar. They were always the guys that worked on any ships, any discs, or any small aircraft. Those were the guys that were always working on it. The 7-footers. The bigger ones were basically the managers of every business on Ceres. Every place that you went that was a public place, like a bar or a restaurant or whatever it was, a library, didn't matter. There was always one of those guys there that was in charge of it. And they did report to the Germans did have authority over them, from what I remember. There were police that were Germans, that could show up, and they basically had run of the place, and it was their colony.
So can you take us through your day-to-day experiences? Were you able to visit these bars or these establishments? What was your day-to-day life like?
Well, in the beginning, I lived in an area that was like a prison without bars. I had like a 5x8 or whatever, 5x9. It looked like a prison cell, and I had a cot in there. There was a little like a one drawer of a desk, small thing that was attached to the wall, but I didn't own anything. I lived there, and there was thousands of other guys that lived in them too. The slave area. And in the morning, all the lights would come on. There was a buzzer that went off. Everybody had to wake up. You had to shower out, and you had to shower in. You had to shower twice a day, period. And so we'd get up. You had to go to the showers. There was a hook. You'd hang your whatever you were sleeping on the hook. Go in the shower at one end. We'd all line up, hundreds of guys. You only had a minute in the shower to clean yourself, and then you went out the other side, and there was another hook with your clothes for that day. And so we would get dressed, and then we went right outside. There was a security, like a window that let everybody out. And right after that was when we had collars, and sometimes they would take your collar off, sometimes not. But they would put your collar on you, and it was a shock collar, and you could get shocked from it. The mind control was as such. The trauma mind control was that when we got shocked, you would just go into like a hypnotized, like a catatonic state, and await commands, and you would do anything you were told after you were shocked for a few, for minutes after. But then from there, we went to a train station right outside the door. That was where trains picked us up, and a lot of guys went on one train to the mines, and I would go on another train to the hangar, and it dropped me off right at where I was supposed to go, and I would walk on an umbilical, like a hallway that connected to the ship, so I never really saw the outside of the ships, and go right into where I was and go to work. And it was Groundhog Day. Later on, I got promoted to cargo engineer, and I got to go in the front of the ship and ride the elevator and go to mission briefings. And I got a small paycheck, which allowed me to buy train fare, and when I was off work, go into the city, and I could travel. And it was only about 2 years that I had, out of the whole time I was there, it was only about 2 years that I had any kind of freedom, so I eventually did get promoted to the point where I was still a slave, but I had a little bit of mobility, and I was proud of that. That was a long ways for me to come. And I did go to bars. There was a place that I frequented, without telling the whole entire story, there was a place that I frequented, and I made friends. And interesting enough, sadly enough, it was the red light district. And the people that I made friends with were other slaves that were sex workers. So I didn't make enough money to actually participate in that, but I was allowed to go there and just stay for free, kind of thing. And I was one of them. I had been through what they had been through, and those were my friends. I eventually had a girlfriend there.
Now, yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Could you talk about the experiences you had, like, for your last few years there, and your experiences with your girlfriend? How did that come about?
Man, where to start? What had happened for me was for me to get promoted was a ship had broke down, and I crawled up in a pipe, and there was a valve that was stuck open that was a vital process of the ship. I don't know what it did, but they had called down from the bridge and said we had to get that working, and I didn't have anybody else there to pull me out of the pipe. And they kept calling back, and so I crawled up in a pipe and with a wrench and tapped the valve closed, and as a result, I was burnt very badly. I was cooked. I mean, literally, my face was burnt very, third-degree burns on my face, and my arm was caught up above my head where I did that, and my hand had been burnt very badly. I had inhaled steam. They pulled me out and saved my life, and saved me, and I was in bad shape. I remember freezing, being cold when they pulled me out. But they said that if I wasn't a slave, or if I was an enlisted person that did that, I would have medaled. I would have got a medal for that. And I had no idea what the circumstances were. I had no whatever. So I did not get a medal, but they did give me a promotion to cargo engineer, and I got a much easier job. When I went to the red light district and I was given permission to go there and stay in the same table, I could come and go there. When the place filled up, I had to leave. But when it was empty, there was a table that the owner couldn't see. And I guess one of the girls had been assaulted there in that table. So I was allowed to sit at that table as a placeholder for free. And so I would, when I got off work, I had nothing to do and I had the ability to go. So I would go there and I'd just sit there. And I could listen to music. They had music, and I could see pretty girls. And that's so okay. So someone from command found out that I was going there. The guys in the mission briefings, I told them that I was going there, and one of them came there on an off day when I wasn't there and explained that I would have told the story that I would have had a medal, like and told the owner, treat him good, treat him good when he's here, kind of thing. Really talked me up. And the girls felt bad for me because at that point, I had been raped, I guess. It's hard to talk about. But I had never really been with a woman. So I was a virgin at that time. So the girls that worked there went to the owner, the ET, and said, look, other guys that have medals get a freebie. When they come in and they get a medal, we should do that for him so at least he can be with a woman, once. And right. So they did. They gave me a free one. And so I had sex with a girl there, and we hit it off. And for the rest of my time that I had the ability to go there, we fell in love, and we were deeply in love with each other, even though she was a sex worker and I was a slave, and I didn't have any ability to really be with her. And so, but I would go see her, and we would sit and talk every time we could. When it wasn't busy, she could spend time with me. And when it was busy, I could just say hi to her and leave, But that's how that came about.
And she was human?
Yeah, they were from Earth. They were in the same exact situation as me. They had no memory. We would always try to guess by how they talked, where they were from. And, we would try to run it by, people tried to figure out where they were from that didn't remember. And but they were in the same boat that I was. They had been taken from Earth. They had no memory of where they were from. They woke up with amnesia and were put through sex training by some, they didn't go through the trauma-based mind control, the movies and stuff like I did. They went through a brutal sex training program that made them do that. They all said they kind of had the same kind of treatment. And then they were sold off, and the girl that was my girlfriend said that she went to Mars and worked there, and it was horrible. And she got the rapid fire, brothel treatment, and she hated it. It was exhausting, and she was abused. And I guess it was illegal where it was, and it got caught. They got caught, and she got sold off and ended up on Ceres working there at Crumbs. It was called Crumbs. And she liked it much better because there she had the ability to say no. If there was somebody that wanted to have sex with her, she could turn it down. And so she really felt empowered. She said compared to what she had been through prior, and she had time on Earth too. She said the first 6 months she was on Earth and owned privately by somebody and as a sex slave. And she went through her training and then went to somewhere that she said they kept her in an apartment and near an animal hospital. And that they would come in and bring her groceries and see her a couple times. The rest of the time, she just sat and watched TV. She was locked in. But that's what she had gone through. Now and she was there. She was only 7 years in. I was like 18 years in. So we knew that I was going to go back first. Everybody had an idea of when they were going back.
Now, did they have to serve as aliens at these brothels?
Absolutely. It's a big business. There were a lot of diplomatic situations there. There were times we went there and the music was terrible, and it was because they were welcoming. They had a group of some ET group from another planet they're visiting that they were trying to impress and wine and dine. And even if they weren't attending the business, they still played their music in case they walked in. The music was terrible. I said, how do you guys dance to this? It was like electronic music, but just not coherent, not for us,
Right.
And it was, and they got they would roll out the red carpet because ETs, that's a big thing. It's kind of like when you're on vacation, if you could travel interstellar and you could go to another and meet another race that was sort of like us, a little bit different, but still had beautiful women, and there was prostitution, then why not? Kind of, and that's a big business up there. That was, I don't care what anybody says, peace and love and all that. They're very real about it. Sexuality, I think, has a much different role in space than among many cultures. They have a completely different sexuality than what we've been sold and what we've grown up knowing. Sexuality is a big deal, and it's been repressed for us. For the populace down here, let's face it, they repress sexuality. You're going to get AIDS. Don't have sex. There's no, wait till you're 18. Kids are having sex before that. 15 is more likely. But it's a crime before that, so you feel guilty about it. You're not supposed to tell anybody. Don't tell your dad. Don't tell your mom. Sexuality is repressed in other cultures. From my experience from sitting in that bar and watching other cultures come in and out, sexuality is a whole different thing. There were ETs that preferred to have sex in front of a crowd. They preferred it. They didn't want to have sex. They said, the girls would tell me that. They said they are not turned on. If you get them alone and try to have sex, and they try to have sex with them, they don't want anything to do with it unless there's somebody there watching. Like, it's a culture. It's a cultural thing. And that's not disgusting or anything. It's our culture. Think about it. If you did 100 years of programming through media, you could change the sexual culture, and it's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening before our eyes. They are promoting homosexuality to our kids far more than they did than in my generation. Homosexuality is accepted now.
That's what I was going to say. You can actually see some of this programming coming out in modern day media and Hollywood and everything they're doing, and it makes you wonder, how they with all the abductions and all this pedophile and the pedophile rings, that all this stuff could go so much deeper than people would ever realize. People being basically taken off planet to be sex slaves. It's crazy.
But I don't want to get too new age and too metaphysical about it, but what I've learned from studying the CIA stuff and going into the psychic research and then recounting what I remember, the human mind works like a complex radio. Like you have different wavelengths of your energy, of your megahertz. And okay, so I don't want to get too metaphysical, but basically when two people meet each other, they have different megahertz, they have a different wavelength. And then you have sex and you have the same wavelength because it went down to a base primal thing. Your bodies took over and overwrote your mentality. Think about it for a minute during sex. Your mind gets overwritten. It goes back to it. So you guys both go to the same basic stuff, and you can exchange information much faster when you're both on that same page. Some people don't hit it off, and it only lasts for as soon as they're done, a half hour later, they go back to being at a different wavelength. Some people hit it off, and they go back to the same wavelength, and they get married, and they stay together forever. But I'm saying, to have sex with somebody, both your minds synchronized to a wavelength, and that's why there are different forms of it. That's why rape is so bad, because it's one person hits that wavelength and the other one hits a painful, suffers. And so sexuality is a form of exchange and communication far beyond the biological function of reproduction. When you're talking about a sentient being like a human being, something as complex as a human being, and then even higher up, there were ETs that only had mental sexuality with the girls. There were girls that went crazy from it. There were side effects. There were certain races that came in that they had to pay 4 or 5 times more the rate because there was a probability that the girl could be mentally harmed from it.
Wow.
Because they were telepathically linked during it. And there were definitely after effects from telepathic behavior during sex from ETs. There was a big thing. And like I said, there were some ETs that had not compatible genitals. So they still did pay for the service, and they still did have sex on a mental level. They still had the connection. And so sexuality, when there's a disclosure and humankind has to get along, begin bridging with many different cultures, our culture that's been greatly repressed, this is one of those things that's going to come up. Not only do they behave different, not only do they have different punishments for different crimes on other worlds, they have different mating abilities. They have different ways to do it, and different things are acceptable that we find unacceptable. I think it's pretty easy to agree that any situation that creates a victim and it's not a consensual thing, and they get into the pedophile thing. Children cannot consent because they're not old enough to. So it's pretty cut and dry there. But beyond that, there is an age of consent that's, I believe, slightly younger than 18. Kids are having sex at 15.
Right.
I mean, they are. And 16, I think, is the actual age of consent. So, I mean, right there, our system is kind of wrong. But there are other things about it. And, the whole ownership thing, once you have sex with somebody, you own them, and they can't be with anybody else. Or you know what I'm saying? Like all that negative stuff, that's not realistic either. Why would 50% of marriages fail if that's the case? You know what I'm saying? Like there are things there. It's been repressed from us.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's completely understandable, and you're right. Whenever, if anything close to this is ever disclosed, people are going to have some major adjustments. I mean, there's so many things that they could have never even thought possible.
Well, think about being in a room of beings that can read your mind. Think about having no lies at all, and they can mentally ask you a question and pull the answer out without you. You know what I'm saying? Like if I asked you this, have you ever done a hit and run? Have you ever accidentally bumped into a car and drove off? Right now, you're accessing that, whether you want me to know it or not. Right now, if you have, you're accessing that memory, and if one of these beings, that a more advanced race, can access that, even though you just flash thought about it, now they know. And so think about that on a grand scale. These are the things that we're going to have to live with once we accept the fact that there's ET life up there. This is a consequence. People are going to have to live a different life. And then you look back at the religions, and these are ETs coming down and preaching, righteousness, so that you're not blamable, teaching that because they want you to live with them. It's part of their culture. Entire cultures don't have a secret from each other at all. And think about how many people that you live with every day that can't function if they couldn't tell a secret. You know what I mean? Some people are there, and the whole damn life is a lie, or you know what I mean, or a front. Right. They're not. They behave nothing like what they really are, because that's our society where it's a requirement.
Yeah.
So there are major things that are going to have to be accepted by everybody to coexist with ET races.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of suppression, that's a whole nother show we can get into. I mean, our whole history, all our history books are basically lies. But now for the last few minutes, could you talk about your last few days in the program and what that was like? Did they tell you were going home now? Talk about that.
You always had a rough idea. So there was a mission that we flew about 6 months before I was due to go home. And I don't want to get into the whole thing and eat up time, but basically I disobeyed an order, and they shocked me and demoted me. So I ended up working a double. I ended up working my cargo job and then working down in the bay, manually moving boxes around. I ended up working a double shift. The ship would go out on its mission and come back, and I would finish my job for the day. And instead of going, I went down and started another day, and I worked like long days for the last 6 months because I'd been demoted. It was a punishment. So I lost the ability. I never had to say bye to my girl. Lost all the money I'd saved up for that.
Do you remember what you
I
did
was only allowed to go.
Happen? Do you remember what you did?
Oh, I remember exactly what I did. I disobeyed a direct order. Like I said, that's a whole other long story.
I got you.
We were in a combat situation, and I disobeyed an order. But so they came and got me the last day. And the other thing was that usually a couple days before people went back, we would all do their job for them. The last day or the last 2 days or so. Some guys got it a whole week, if everybody liked them. But the last day, it was customary to do their work for them, for everybody else to step up and do their job. So that last day, nobody did their job. And I didn't get that. They didn't do that for me. Nobody. I was disgraced. And so that morning, I reported to the ship, and waiting there at the umbilical was an officer, and they said, "You guys go in. You're coming with me." And he took me on another train. Or it wasn't even a train. He took me in a wheeled vehicle to another part of the hangar. And then we got off there and went down a long catwalk, and he was explaining to me, I had no business to disobey. I had no idea what was going on. And he told me to go back to my life and settle down, marry a German girl. That's what he said. Settle down and don't worry about UFOs or aliens or ETs. Go back to your life and settle down and live a good life or something. But he kind of was condescending. He was an officer. He took me to another umbilical, which was like a bridge, and it was a disc this time. And I went on a disc, and in the upstairs of it, you went in, and there was a stairs that went up. There was a stairs that went down to the cockpit, which had a reptile flying it and a human. And up to the upstairs, there was a round room, and it was grimy. It was filthy, and it was an old transport, is what it was. And there was probably 8 or 9 other guys up there, and they flew me back to the moon. And it was like 6-hour flight for the disc, and they were all going back too. That was the first time, not the first time, but I was on there. There was an African man. There was a black man, and so he was in another place. Like he was stopping off at Ceres and then going on to the moon to go back to finish his 20 years. But he was out somewhere elsewhere in the solar system in a mine. He was a miner, he said. But there were other guys, and I paced the floor. I didn't want to forget my girl because I didn't get to say goodbye to her. And I remember the whole time just pacing the floor and telling myself, I'm not going to forget. I didn't want to forget. And that was something very big to me. I did not want to forget. I felt like I was ended it on a bad note. And felt like I was in the middle of just beginning somewhere, and I was madly in love with that girl, and I didn't want to forget her. There were other things too about it, but I paced the floor back and forth, and through the whole that black guy, excuse me, the African guy, he said, "There's nothing they're going to do." He yelled down in the cockpit. He was yelling. He was being obscene. He was like, "F you." I said, "You're going to get in trouble." He said, "There's nothing they can do. They got to have us back." He said, "It's the law." So he's like, "There's no punishment. I'm not going to get in trouble for anything. They have to take us straight back and run us straight in there and do the procedure and put us back. So there's no trouble that I'm going to get in. Screw them." And so I was combative through the whole time. I didn't want to remember. I didn't want to forget. And I was combative. I didn't do it. And they kind of didn't know what to do with me for that. And it was a long process. It was a process that took weeks for them to put it. I went back to the base, and it was all grays. And there was a time when they put us on a table, and you had to remain still. There was a room with several different stations, and you would go to the station, and it was programming. It was another round of that programming with drugs, but like way more advanced than the Mars stuff. When I learned how to do the ship, this method of programming was a super advanced. Like you kind of zoned out. Like it plugged you into the screen and they gave you a drug, and I don't remember everything that it did. Like you zoned out, but you woke up and they would test you on it. One of them was to not remember faces. and it worked. And they had where even now when I think about even my girlfriend, her face is blurry. They did that. That was one of the things. Jason Rice calls them parting gifts. There was the other one, which was a ridiculous pirate ship, and I remember laughing at it and thinking, "No way." And I remember telling them, "I'm going to remember this. I'm not going to forget. You guys aren't going. I'm not that dumb. I'm going to remember this." And they eventually took me to a station, and they had a chronovisor where they could look into probable futures, and it was no one could see it, like the screen was changed, and only the long-necked white gray. They look like a gray, but they were white. Only they could look at the chronovisor, and they would look like proofreading the work when they did them. They would put me through one of these stations of mind control, and then go back to the chronovisor and proofread it to see if I forgot, and I didn't. And so they sent me to a corner office. That was the first time I looked out of the building on the lunar surface. It was a corner office, and it was a whole super advanced another station like that. And it was like they showed me movies of people being butchered, like really traumatic movies that they showed me of like war scenes, like first person though, like as if they recorded it from the person's eyes, like first person, and a guy going into a village with a machete and chopping people up. And I went, "Whoa, what is this?" And I remember just being in shock from it. It was just shocking, And then it turned the seat turned me. It turned me to another screen, and it came up and it said, "I'm your God." And I said, "What? You're not my God." And then boom, I got a zap. And then I I don't remember what happened after that. It was a programming. And they said that eventually it wasn't the acceptable percentages for me that I was going to remember, because it looked at timelines, possible timelines. So it's not like a definite one. They had to get it down to an acceptable percentage of timelines before they could put me back. And they were running out of time, and they said that they just couldn't do it. The guy there, the ET there, just couldn't do it, and he said they were going to take me and give me a lobotomy. They were going to put me back mentally damaged. And when they took me to the office, was right down the hall to do that. There was surgery. They said, "You're going to get surgery. You're going to get a lobotomy." Or lobotomy. I forget exactly how he said it, but basically I was going to be turned into a vegetable, and I'm going, "What?" They took me down the hall, and they had not. They had to do paperwork, and one of the missions. One of the Germans, my captain or some of the, deleted my records, and so they couldn't fill out the paperwork for the procedure. They said he doesn't have any records. I said, "Well, in that case, don't worry about it. No one can track him. Just put him back." They, as far as they were concerned, it couldn't come back to them, even though they were told to get me to a certain probability of not remembering. Because I didn't have a record, they couldn't get in trouble for it. So they said, "Just put him back." And then they took me, and it felt like I got it. They put me on a table, and that's when all the long shots and everything started. They put a barrier around me, and every day they gave me shots in my legs. It was painful, and it was weeks. I thought it was months, it felt like. And then at the end of that, they took the table and wheeled me into a machine, and it felt like I got incinerated. And I woke up in my 10-year-old body. I woke up back and had no memory of that, and had memory of mom and dad again. I went right back to that lab.
Oh, that's fascinating. Now, whenever you started to get your memories back, it must have been traumatic. How are you kind of working through that? Is this just by talking to people, or are you doing any other type of therapy or healing?
Well, the first year was tough. The beginning, and it was hard to even talk about it. The best therapy has been talking about it, been doing interviews and meeting other people. People asking me questions about it. When you get a question you don't expect, it forces a new memory. It forces the memory out. Think about like your childhood, and say your 9th birthday party. A lot of people can't remember it off the top of their head. But if somebody that was there comes along and says, "Hey, remember your 9th birthday? And we had remember that chair we broke?" And you'd go, "Oh, I remember that. It's a keystone memory." And now you'd access more memories from that day, from those forgotten time. It's like that. So talking to other people brings out new memories, and just talking about it is able to get it off your chest. You know what I mean? Like internalizing it, that something unbelievable happened makes it believable. You know, makes it more believable to you, because I still get days I wake up and think about it and I go, holy shit, wow, you know, really? And I'm to the point now where I've digested it and dealt with it. And a lot of the problems I've worked out. A lot of the problems from it you can't deal with because you don't know what caused them. So being able to remember the trauma, that mission where I disobeyed an order, I had a lot of PTSD from that. I had a lot of trauma from that, but I didn't know why. I lived with the symptoms and I didn't know why. So after I was able to remember that mission, now I go when the PTSD came forward, I was able to assign a cause, and I'd say, oh, it's from that, and then I could kind of unravel it. And so it's been very healing just being able to remember. I think it kills me to think about thousands of people that have been through stuff that are dealing with the problems, you know, who knows, the emotional problems, and then don't know why they have an emotional problem. Just all of a sudden one day wake up and have issues. So that's been very healing, you know, talking about it. And now I'm kind of trying to get back to my normal life and kind of waiting on the shoe to drop. I hope that there is a disclosure. I hope that we get something. I'm sure the first version of it's going to be very watered down, and they're not going to give us everything. They're not going to give us, you know, mega aliens and super advanced Death Stars kind of stuff right out of the gate. I'm sure they're going to give us a watered down version, and they're going to build upon it through months, weeks, months, years. You know, that just seems to me more logical. So many people have no idea what's coming, and to just give them everything all at once kind of sounds unbelievable. So I'm sure they're going to package it in a very sanitized, very believable way. And I'm kind of waiting for that. I hope so, because I think people need it. I think we live, nature extends beyond the sky.
Yeah, I think people are ready for it. And, you know, we live in a time where, you know, everything is changing. I think that disclosure may even be forced by not our government saying it, but by an event happening or something happening that we can't control.
Well, I think we're getting close to backyard technology, and by that I mean we're getting like 30 years ago, no one could just wheel out a 5 meter off-axis paraboloid telescope with a polarized spectrometer on it out of his garage. No one could do that. Right. We're getting close to that now, though. In another 10 or 20 years, people are going to be able to wheel out a device from their garage that'll see life on another planet. Do you get what I mean? So pretty soon it'll be widespread, like undebatable. We're gonna catch them in the cover-up. And just because technology is getting better, you know, computers are getting smaller, people have access. And it's not about this, you know, imagine growing up with the ability with YouTube, with the ability to just look up how-tos. Imagine how more advanced our life would be. The kids have that now, but they've only had it a short time. So give it 50 years of that kind of knowledge being accessible at your fingertips. So we're getting to the point where it's going to be accessible. You know, there's going to be a tipping point, and I think that many programs had an apocalypse scenario. Now, once we got to that point where they couldn't hide it no longer, I think they were planning on killing us. You know, just boom, you know, some kind of virus or some kind of cataclysm to kill off most of us and start over and tell the same lies again. Bomb us back to the Stone Age and continue. I think that was a real program. I think that's what I think there are other programs that say, no, you can't do that. And I think that there's a war going on for that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. The timelines may have changed, and we may be able to even control our own timeline in a way. And that, again, is another show. But, Tony, we're out of time for tonight. I want to thank you so much for joining us. That was a fascinating story. And is there any other final words you'd like to leave everyone with?
No, just really research. If you feel like you've had anything like this, any kind of everybody, I think most of the audience is drawn to this subject because most people have some weirdness that they've been through. And if you feel that way, reach out to somebody. It doesn't have to be me. Reach out and talk about it. I think that's the best way to deal with any of it. Get a group, get a support group going, make some friends, and talk about it. Open up. Don't take it to the grave with you. Just keep plugging along and researching. Ultimately, thinking about it is the best thing we can do for disclosure. Just keeping, bringing it out slowly into the open in a social sense is the best thing we can do. The other thing is check out the psychic stuff. I don't want to plug a bunch of other companies for no reason, but it's real, and check it out. There are some stuff. There's binaural tech on the megahertz. Like I said, the Monroe Institute. The remote viewing, there's a lot of declassified CIA stuff that is real and can help people if you can practice it in your daily life. So have a look.
Very good, Tony. I want to thank you again, and you have a great night.
You too. It's been fun. Great. Thank you.